Good afternoon, everybody. Steve Fletcher with the Trumpet for My People. And I want to share something with you from the New Testament. As I've been looking at the fall feasts and the winter feasts in the calendar of the feast days, I find something very interesting that I want to share with you. Now, the first thing I want to say is that we have a biblical precedent that says that any matter will be established in the mouth of two or three witnesses. So one witness, it is not good enough to have one witness or one proof from the Bible to establish a matter or to establish a doctrine or to establish a teaching. We need to have two or three witnesses. And so this is a text in and of itself that is repeated three times to show the importance of this precedent in and of itself. This this phrase, This phrase is used three times in the Bible. By the mouth of two or three witnesses, the matter shall be established. And this is in Deuteronomy 19:15, Matthew 18:16, and 2 Corinthians 13:1. So this exact precedent is used three times to show us the importance of having two or three witnesses. This teaching in and of itself has three witnesses, that every matter must have two or three witnesses. So I wanted to bring that point to you. Now, in the calendar of feasts, there are actually 9 feasts. And we have 7 feasts that are taught in the, actually 8 feasts that are taught in the Old Testament, 7 that were originally given of the Lord, and then Purim was added to that. And then in the intertestamental period, there was another feast that was added called the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Hanukkah. And this is part of the reason why on the Hanukkah menorah, there are actually 9 branches instead of 7 branches on the Hanukkah menorah. And so what I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, just for your own study, that you can take a look at this more, is that, okay, if we're going to look at all the feasts, we have the spring feasts were already fulfilled, so I'm not looking at that right now. What I want to look at is I want to look at the 5 fall and winter feasts, which are the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah, and Purim. Okay, so let's look at these 5, and I want to show you something that is very, very important, and that will help give us perspective as to what we're looking at and to where we should give priority, even as we consider the second coming of Christ, or as we consider the moment of rapture as far as a feast day is concerned. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is that the Feast of Trumpets in the New Testament, okay, I'm looking up the word trumpets in the word search in the Bible, and the word trumpets is only used 3 times, and not once does it refer to the Feast of Trumpets. So we have the Feast of Trumpets is not mentioned at all in the New Testament. Very important detail, that in the New Testament, the Feast of Trumpets is not mentioned once. Okay, here's the, I will leave all these links for you, and you can study this out for yourself. But this is the word study on the word trumpets. The Feast of Trumpets is not mentioned. Now, go on to the Day of Atonement. And here's another interesting detail. The Day of Atonement in the New Testament is not mentioned either. Okay, the Day of Atonement is not mentioned. It's not mentioned once in the Gospels. And if Hebrews refers to the Day of Atonement, it refers to the work of the high priest when he goes in one day out of the year to make atonement, but it does not actually mention the phrase Day of Atonement. Okay, so this is Day of Atonement. Now the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, now we've talked about this previously, but if we bring to your attention the fact that the Feast of Tabernacles is mentioned once specifically in the Gospel, and then if we go in John chapter 7 and we see the Feast of Tabernacles, we will see that Jesus did not go up openly into the Feast of Tabernacles. He went up secretly to the Feast of Tabernacles. He did not go openly up to the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, so he said in verses 6 through 8 in John chapter 7, then Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to this feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. And we were talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, as it says in verse 2, John chapter 7. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. And Jesus said, I will not go up to this feast. And he went up later, but he went up secretly. So this is an important detail. Jesus did not celebrate openly the Feast of Tabernacles. He went up secretly. In verse 10, it says, he went up to the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Okay, now let's look at the Feast of Hanukkah. The word Hanukkah actually is not, in the Bible. And so we look at the word dedication. As we bring up the word Hanukkah and do the word search, the word dedication comes up, because that is the word. Hanukkah means dedication. The word Hanukkah, it means dedication. The Feast of Dedication is the Feast of Hanukkah because Hanukkah means dedication in Hebrew. And so that's why when you do the word search on Hanukkah, the 2 times dedication is used, it is brought up. Then if we do the word search on dedication, well, it's the same word, dedication. 2 Bible results for dedication. It brought it up. So if we study that out, right? Hanukkah means dedication. And then we see that the Feast of Dedication is the feast that was in winter. And we see that Jesus came openly into the temple teaching on the Feast of Dedication. Okay. Now I'm going to show you guys why this is so important, everything that we're looking at right now. This is so important because this is our second witness. We have to have witness from the New Testament of what we are expecting for the second coming of Christ and for the rapture, the beginning of the Great Tribulation. We must have witness from the New Testament. And so what we have here in John chapter 10 is that Jesus came openly into the temple. And it says in verse 23, Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Verse 22, now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Okay, and so what we have here then is that Jesus came into the temple openly on the Feast of Dedication. Now, okay, and so the Feast of Dedication is the feast in winter, right? Okay, we saw that in John chapter 10. It was the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Okay? And now, from the Gospels, the teaching about the second coming, the beginning of the Great Tribulation, if we study the word winter, Matthew 24:20, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Mark 13:18, pray that your flight may not be in winter. John 10:22, now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Okay. Okay, now let's look at the Feast of Purim. Okay. Now, first of all, I want you to see that the name Esther is only used in the Bible in the book of Esther. She is not mentioned anywhere else in the entire Bible. So Esther is not mentioned in the New Testament, nor is she mentioned in any other book of the Bible. She's only mentioned in the book of Esther. So there's no keys there in the New Testament about Esther. And if you study the word Purim, it's used 6 times, also only in the book of Esther. There are no direct references to the Feast of Purim in the New Testament. So what am I trying to say with all this? Well, there are 5 feasts. There are 5 feasts in the fall and in the winter. We have the Feast of Trumpets. We have the Feast of Tabernacles. We have the Day of Atonement. We have the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah. And we have Esther, the Feast of Purim. Okay? There's 5 feasts in the fall and in the winter. But there's only one feast that Jesus celebrated openly in the New Testament, the Feast of Hanukkah. Now, I want you to consider this carefully. And after careful consideration, I want to ask you if you can sincerely come back and say that this is not a valid point that may mark the time of the beginning of the Great Tribulation, possibly the rapture of the church. We are looking for the time of his coming, the second coming. We are looking for the rapture. We are looking for when will the Great Tribulation begin. The New Testament must give us the witness. We must have a witness within the New Testament. And in the New Testament, Jesus did not celebrate the Feast of Trumpets, nor is the Feast of Trumpets mentioned at all in the New Testament. Jesus did not celebrate the Day of Atonement, nor is the Day of Atonement mentioned at all in the New Testament. Jesus went up to the Feast of Tabernacles, but he went up secretly, not openly, exactly what it says in John chapter 7. He went up secretly, not openly, to the Feast of Tabernacles. And Esther and Purim are not mentioned at all in the New Testament. But the Feast of Hanukkah is the only feast where Jesus actually went up openly into the temple and taught on the Feast of Dedication. Yet, the Feast of Dedication is set aside as a valid option for the time of his coming. And yet, it is the Feast of Dedication that is in winter, and it is confirmed in both Matthew and Mark. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Pray that your flight may not be in winter. Now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Winter, winter, winter. 3 witnesses. This is exactly what we have to see. We have to have 3 witnesses from the Bible. We're not talking about dreams or visions or subjective witnesses. We're talking about written witnesses from the Word of God. This is what we need to understand. So we have 3 witnesses from the New Testament that says winter, winter, and winter. And then in Matthew 24 and in Mark 13, it goes on to say, then there will be great tribulation. Let's look at Mark 13. What does it say after? Pray that your flight may not be in winter. What does it go on to say? We have looked at this in Matthew chapter 24. It says, then there will be great tribulation. In Mark, it says, verse 18, pray that your flight may not be in winter, for in those days there will be tribulation. I think it's very clear as we study out this information from the Bible. I think it is very clear that the Great Tribulation will begin in winter. And the only winter feast that Jesus celebrated, the only fall or winter feast that Jesus celebrated was the Feast of Dedication, the Feast of Hanukkah. Okay, so this is our Bible revelation moment in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. All matters will be established. I truly pray you guys are blessed and that this simple study today can open your eyes to the importance of Hanukkah in relation to the rapture of the church and the beginning of the Great Tribulation. I pray you guys are blessed in Jesus' name.